one of the reasons I'm trying not to obsess only about the end of the world scenario in Revelation is because I think we miss that undercurrent. There is this encouragement and this inspiration here that goes way beyond how is it all going to end. It's why stay faithful to Jesus when it's so hard, when there's so much against you, when the enemy is so ferociously attacking you. Why would you stay faithful to Jesus? And the Revelation is kind of well, here's why. Let's look at it. Now, part of that is that he will be defeated in the end. Amen?
Amen.
Like that end of the world scenario, I want to talk about that. But in terms of obsessing about the details of all the players in the game are and when it's all going to happen, I just think a lot of times that's more distracting than helpful. So that's why we're taking the tact we are. So let's open up again to chapter 4, Revelation 4. The throne room scene of God. It's beautiful, it's mysterious. And when we get to these 4 living creatures, it's a little creepy. I mean, it's the throne room scene of God, so it seems weird to use the word creepy, but am I right? That's a weird creature being described here.
Yeah.
These 4. We began looking at them, we're going to keep looking at them because we only got to verse 7 last time. And the focus that John has on them continues into the next couple verses. Hello.
Yes, you.
We'll wait for that to stop just so it doesn't derail us. So we'll give the phone and you time to get to chapter 4 here. So as per usual, you know what? Let me see. I never know.
Must not be a machine.
You just stop it right before he gets here.
I know that's how it usually is.
He answered it. We will be here.
Answer?
What's
We
you?
just love each other again.
That's when you miss your kids. I answered if I know who it is. I usually know Mark. Oh, I know.
Mark, the phone was ringing.
I can still hear. I just don't walk as well as I used to.
I have Audra trained not to answer the phone monitors.
I know. It doesn't help when they say, if you want to know the list, press 2. It doesn't help.
No, it doesn't.
Mm-mm. They still
They call
call.
from a different number.
Yeah, I remember you know.
I like
Yeah.
the ones when they call you, and I haven't actually had my own number show up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Else did too. Now, how does that happen?
Well, they made a mistake.
But now they have the 814 and the 342, so you think it's
Now.
The iPhone was Jessica Clark. I answered. I know her. I couldn't believe it. You wouldn't think it would be legal.
No, I don't think it is.
It's almost scary, isn't it?
Yeah, how they can do
Yeah.
Because they have my cell phone. Now, where
I know. Because I never put my cell phone number down for anything.
Mm-mm.
I don't even know mine.
No, they'll call.
I know, but other people do.
They'll call and it'll be a bell phone answer, but the guy's got a heavy, Indian accent, let's put it that way. So you know he's called from halfway around the
You
world.
can hear on the other telemarketer.
Oh, yeah, they're all active in the back, yes.
You can hear him clear as a bell. Got no tentacle, you can't hear him.
I had one. I picked up because I didn't know who it was.
Yeah.
That
And
was
it was my
something.
cell phone. Don't hang up, it says.
Somebody's needing help with heat. They ran out of oil tonight.
Oh.
So, glad I answered. Okay, so let's read through chapter 4, just to get a review of what we've already seen and then what we're moving into study this evening. Does anyone want to read that chapter for us? Thank you, Derek.
After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven, with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby, a rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. Also in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center around the throne were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion, the second was like an ox, the third had a face like a man, and the fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings, and was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. Day and night they never stopped saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, Lord, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created to have their being."
Whoa, okay. So just to review, when we started in chapter 4, it says, after this, after what? What has just happened in chapters 2 and 3?
The churches, letters.
Yeah, so he's received dictation from Jesus. Write this down and send it to my 7 churches. Those are the churches in Asia Minor we talked about, which is modern-day Turkey. So 7 messages, each one full of meaning for those churches then and certainly our church today. So after this dictation part of my vision, he sees heaven with a gate or a door open, and he's invited up. In fact, I would say commanded, right? Come up here. Not, should you like to come? No, come up here. Now, remember we talked about the fact that when you have a throne room or a throne scene of God and his council, if you want to call it that, his company, it's never just for curiosity's sake. It's always because something momentous is about to happen in heaven, and God wants there to be a human witness so that it can be shared. So what we're looking for as we go through, and we won't find it until chapter 5, what we're looking for is, why is John here now? For what purpose did God bring him to the heavenly scene? What decision has been made that needs to be made known to humankind? Okay, we looked at that when we started chapter 4 at other Old Testament passages. A decision's been made in heaven by God and the council, and now humans need to be made aware of it. So remember, the first person seen is God himself, though he doesn't say that, right? He says there's somebody sitting on it. And he describes the throne slightly. There's this circular rainbow type thing, which, depending on your translation, you're either reading it as a rainbow like an emerald or an emerald like a rainbow, either way. It's this shiny, kind of effervescent thing around the throne. The person sitting on it doesn't have much of a description. In verse 3, what is the description of the person on the throne?
Jasper and ruby.
Yeah. Sitting, okay, that's a throne, that makes sense. But in terms of how he looked, or how the person looked, jasper and ruby, reddish. Now we looked again at the Old Testament visions, and fire was a big part of the visions. So I'm wondering, is that one reason why there's this reddish look to him? And then we find out that there are these 24 other thrones, and who's on those thrones?
Elders.
And remember, they're circling the great throne of the one sitting on the great throne, as if they're in subservience to him, which is, of course, true. And so we talk about, who could these 24 elders be? As I'm looking at it, the evidence points to human beings. Glorified, no doubt. They're in the heavenly presence. But the fact they're called elders, the fact that they have the white clothing and remember, that's a victor's crown. That's not royal crown. That's not diadem. It's the victor's crown, which matches a lot of descriptions of what Jesus promised faithful followers, humans. Right? So, just a thought. Why 24? We talked about that. Maybe it's something to do with the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles. Maybe it has to do with the 24 divisions of priests. Maybe both. Who knows? So there's some things in here we just kind of think, well, there's connections, but who knows if that's meant to be the connection? So we just kind of take it as it comes and think about that. All right, and then we saw that the throne itself is described as having, and this is in verse 5, flashes of lightning, rumblings, which just means noises or voices, and peals of thunder. And that takes us back to the Mount Sinai vision. We're on top of Sinai, and the presence of God is intense. And I was just thinking, so many times people come back from what they say are visions of heaven, and everything's just so lovely and peaceful and serene. And I have no doubt that happens in the heavenly presence, but here, not so much. It's actually dreadful. Just like at Sinai. And that may have something to do with why he's there. Is the reason for this vision kind of hinted at there? Is there something severe and harsh that's been decided? We'll keep that in mind. And then who are the next beings we see? Well, actually not beings yet, sorry. Let's get to the middle of verse 5. What else does he see before the throne?
The seven spirits.
7 lamps, which are the spirits of God. We've tickled that before. Angels, the Holy Spirit, what are we talking about? Now we get to these living beasts, though we did talk about the sea of glass a little bit. What is that, a big expanse, or is that the washing basin of the priest? But then we see around the throne, and I did this crude drawing before, let's give it another go. If you have the throne, and then all these 24 lesser thrones with the elders, remember what he says, in the center around the throne, which indicates that they are closer still than those elders, are the 4 living creatures. Even beasts would be a word you could use. And that's the word you use throughout the Bible for just animal life on earth. Which kind of is interesting because of the way they're described. We talked about this in comparing Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10 vision of these 4 beasts, these 4 living creatures. But also we need to bring in here the comparison to the seraphim in Isaiah's vision in Isaiah 6. We're going to see there's a little bit of overlap between these creatures. Now Isaiah in Isaiah 6 calls the creatures he sees the seraphim, and they're above the throne. Because maybe God's in the earthly temple. When Ezekiel sees 4 living creatures, he describes them and he calls them in chapter 10 cherubim, which we talked about. These are the creatures that are put into the architecture and the artwork of the tabernacle and temple. They're the ones that are put onto the ark cover of the Holy Covenant Ark of God. Because it seems to me it represents these beings that are actually around the throne. And so in the artwork, they represent that. They're present in the throne room of God. Now, here's what's interesting, because we're going to look at the next few verses here. And I want to consider how do they compare to the cherubim in Ezekiel or the seraphim in Isaiah. If you're writing notes and you didn't get this yet, what I'm talking about, I'll just write it so you can see it. In Ezekiel chapters 1 and 10, you have the cherubim, 4 living creatures. And then in Isaiah 6, you have the seraphim. Both related to the throne of God. Okay, so let's look at where did we leave off? Verse 7, right? Yes. Okay, verse 8. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. Just to review, remember what the faces of the 4 are described. One of these beings has the face of a human. One is lion. What's the next one? Ox. Eagle. I mentioned those may be representative of earthly life. Human, of course, represents human. That's the apex of the earthly creation of life, because they're made as the image of God to rule. And then we talked about the fact that the lion could very well represent the wild beasts. And I did a word study on lion throughout the Bible, and the strength of the lion is most often emphasized. And ferocious. Like, the way God uses lion in the Old Testament is often, even God himself compares himself to a lion of how he's going to attack either his enemies or his own people ferociously. So the lion pictures that. And then the ox could very well represent the domesticated beasts. But again, when you talk about an ox, Bible, yes, generally, the ox represents power, strength, right? And the horns of the ox have all the way through the Bible. The horn represents power. We're going to see that in Revelation also. And then the eagle. What did we say that might represent?
Flying beasts.
Yeah, flying creatures. So what's left out?
Secret fish.
Yeah, marine life. What up with that, man? Don't worry, you're not represented. I'm not going to try to read into that. I don't know what that's about. But I will say this, human beings in the ancient world weren't nearly as familiar and comfortable with marine life as we are today. They knew of some, they would catch them and eat them and stuff like that, but they were also really scared of them. The deep sea was like terrifying. They had these sea monsters on their maps and in their minds like, ah! So I don't know if that's one reason why this was just not considered as normal as these Anyway, so having that in mind, each of them has the face of one of these earthly creatures. They're in heaven, around the throne of God, but they've got a face of an earthly creature? What's up with that? Surrounded by these 24 beings that seem human in nature. Now, we see that they have how many wings?
6.
Okay. I was going to try to draw these things, but I was like, never mind. Even if I get it decent, it'll scare everybody. So anyway, which of the visions of Ezekiel or Isaiah, which of those visions matches this detail of 6 wings? Which one?
What did you say? I'm sorry.
Which detail, the 6 wings, matches which vision? The cherubim of Ezekiel or the seraphim of Isaiah?
Cherubim?
Was it?
Cherubim?
No. Actually, Ezekiel saw 4 wings on the cherubim. He saw 6 wings on the seraphim, 2 covering the face, 2 covering the feet, and 2 flying. And that's weird. Because most of the details match up with the cherubim. But this detail matches up with the seraphim. Don't ask me what that's about, but there we go. It has 6 wings. Here's another interesting detail that matches up more with the seraphim. Day and night, they never stop saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Now, if you were to stop it there, that is an exact match of which vision?
Isaiah 6:3.
And those are the seraphim, calling out to each other in the temple scene so powerfully that Isaiah said the voices of the seraphim chanting this shook the threshold and the doors of the temple. It's a powerful call of God's worship. So far there's 2 details that line up with the seraphim. Now here's we saw this before, but here's the difference. In Isaiah's vision, the chant was, Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of the hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now that matches the message of Isaiah, because the message of Isaiah was against Israel and the nations. And a lot of his future prophetic looks were about how the law of God would flow from Zion to the whole world, and the new creation was going to come about. So that chant actually sets the tone for the prophecy of Isaiah really well. The whole earth is full of Yahweh's glory. But here in Revelation, what is the chant? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was, and is to come. I love it. But when I worship, I say this a lot. It's so beautiful and powerful. Again, the seraphim were known to chant it, but here, creatures that seem more like cherubim are I don't know what to make of it. But why do you suppose, instead of the ending that Isaiah heard to the chant, why do you suppose here in Revelation It's now who was and is to come. Why might that match the Revelation message more closely than what Isaiah heard? Any thoughts on that?
Because he's coming back, he's coming.
Yes. The who is to come is a big feature of this, right?
Right.
What about the who was and is to
Because
come?
he always was, he is, and he's coming.
Yeah, don't we have similar language in Revelation about beginning and end? Alpha, Omega. It's this picture, and I really want you to keep your eyes open for this. Don't take my word for it. But especially as we see here in chapter 4, the scope of Revelation's message reaches all the way back to creation and all the way forward to new creation. And I think, this is my thought, I think the reason who was and is to come is a more fitting ending to the chant is because Revelation really is showing the whole saga of God's work of the new creation. And we're going to see that as we go, I think, more clearly than we have already. Because here in chapter 4, we're going to look at what the worship of God is centered around in the next couple of verses. So let's just take stock of these weird creatures as we've seen them.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah.
In Isaiah 6, it's like a vision of what heaven is going to be. Right?
Well, in Isaiah 6, it's unclear if he's...
Isaiah's commission, and it's like describing what heaven is, correct?
It's either heaven or the temple, and it's unclear which one he is seeing. And this is one reason why that can be blurred.
Yeah.
The temple, the inner rooms of the temple were supposed to be a picture of the actual heavenly abode of God. So he says the word temple. Does he mean the earthly one or the heavenly one? And as we were talking about that, I said the seraphim are above him. Does that indicate he's in the earthly temple?
Mm-hmm.
And what would have been really awe-inspiring for Isaiah is he's not a high priest, so he had never seen the Ark of the Covenant. Think about that. They have heard of it, just like we have heard of it. And they could say, it's right in that room right there, and never see it. It was hidden, except for one person at a time. Got to go see it once a year. So he's never even seen the throne room of God on earth, which is the Ark of the Covenant. And now, let's just say he's in the earthly temple in the vision. Not only does he get to see the throne room of God as a symbol, the Ark, he's actually seeing God enthroned on a throne in the temple. And whoa, no wonder he's like, I'm undone, I'm a sinner, I can't be here, I'm gonna die. So I'm not sure, really, if his reference to temple is heavenly or earthly. But he doesn't even give that much detail, right? I mean, it's not like he's looking around saying, here's what I saw in God's presence. He sees these creatures, a train of a robe filling the temple. Yeah. That's a fascinating vision, partly because of what he doesn't say, all the details. So, what is similar to the cherubim about what John sees? First of all, there's 4 of them. That matches the vision of Ezekiel. There's 4 of those creatures in Ezekiel's vision. What else? They have eyeballs all over them. We're going to talk about that before we move on, don't worry. As much as you may not want to. We're going to talk about why are they covered in eyeballs. So we'll get back to that. But also there's the faces. The faces match. I mentioned in Ezekiel 10 it changes from ox to cherub. One of the faces, he describes it instead of ox in chapter 1. He calls it the face of a cherub in chapter 10. But in chapter 1 at least, the faces all line up to what John saw in Revelation. But again, what's the difference between those creatures? In Ezekiel, each of the 4 creatures has 4 faces.
Yeah.
In John's, each has a single face, and they're all different. So that's weird. But, once again, what matches up about the seraphim that Isaiah saw? Number 1, the number of wings. Number 2, the chant. So what I was wondering is, in John's vision, he never gives them a title, correct? I mean, in terms of cherubim, seraphim, or any other im. He doesn't give them one. Isaiah did, and Ezekiel did. What I'm wondering is if John kind of has a conglomerate picture. He calls them living creatures like Ezekiel did, yes, but the details he gives is almost like he's merged them. I shouldn't say he. I don't think he's making editorial notes. I think what he saw was a merging of these two beings. Possibly, I don't know that for sure. But just seeing how the details overlap with both creatures, I'm just wondering, is what John saw kind of representative of the heavenly beings that are around God's throne? So you can do what you want with that. I'm noticing how there's these discrepancies in some of the descriptions. Okay, let's talk about eyeballs. Ezekiel saw this with the four creatures. Oh, and John saw this. What do you make of this? Why would these creatures, whether this is actually true in reality or just symbolically true of what they saw, what is the deal with creatures in God's presence being covered all over? Even the wings?
Well, you see everything, you see everything.
Okay, so connect that now. If it obviously represents seeing and awareness, correct? So that's eyeballs. All over. Connect that now to the presence of God. Why would the creatures in the presence of God be understood to have this vision and awareness all around? What are we seeing about God in that?
All seeing, all knowing.
Very good. And I was doing a little search on the word eyes, just because that's the main idea here. And I knew in my mind, just what I know of the scriptures already, that's a big deal in the scriptures. God's sight, his vision, his eyes, going across the earth and things. So let me just give you a taste of some of what the scriptures reveal about the eyes. First of all, I did want to point out what we saw before, but this was a long time ago. In the book of Zechariah, chapter 1, verses 10 and 11, it's not Yahweh himself, but his created servants, which seem to be angelic servants, Zechariah chapter 1, that are kind of his lookouts on planet Earth. They're sent into the earth to check things out and see how they are. Which I think is such an interesting picture because God sees it anyway, doesn't he? Does he really need to send other beings out to, check things out for him? But this is in Zechariah 1, 10 and 11. And going all the way back to verse 7, Zechariah is seeing what looks like a man on a horse, and then there's horses behind him of different colors. Now the man that's on the horse is actually the angel of Yahweh, which, we talked a little bit about this before, but if you really study what that looks like throughout the Old Testament, this seems to be a bodily presence of Yahweh. Not human like Jesus, completely human, but just a bodily vision of Yahweh in these things. So anyways, Zechariah sees the guy on the horse and the horse is behind. He says, "What are these, my Lord?" The angel who was talking with me answered, "I'll show you what they are." Then the man standing among the myrtle trees said, "These are the ones Yahweh has sent to go throughout the earth." And they reported to the angel of Yahweh who was standing among the myrtle trees, "We have gone throughout the earth and found the whole world at rest and in peace." Notice, it seems like they're just going out as scouts, like information finding. And they come back and give the report. Looks like everything's pretty good. No major issues. Yeah, all's well. And I'm sitting here looking at this going, why? Why does God need to send out horse scouts? What's up with that? Doesn't he see it all anyway? But this gives you just a glimmer of an idea. Same with these creatures covered in eyeballs. That when we speak of some of God's attributes, we shouldn't limit it only to God himself having that in and of himself, though I think that's true of knowledge and awareness and all that. But it's also the fact that, and humans can connect this very well to human rulers, he has a whole network of beings at his command through which this stuff is accomplished also. So you realize, don't you, that if an angel sent by God accomplishes something, it is fair to say that God did it. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
God told Mary, "You're going to have a son." Well, but the angel did it. But at whose command? And whose message? God showed John a revelation. Well, the angel sent by Jesus did. Yeah, but who started this whole thing? And so, in that way, we can say God has done, God knows, and all this stuff, but that doesn't preclude the idea that other beings are involved in the process, at his command, doing his will. So, just keep that in mind. The eyeballs all over these creatures could very well speak of God, even though it's these creatures that are pictured that way. Also, keeping in Zechariah, we looked at this before again, like I say, but Zechariah 6, no, where am I? That's not the one. There it is. Yeah, Zechariah 6, there are these 4 chariots that are also sent out. We're going to have to return to these, by the way, when we get to chapter 6 with the seals being opened, because there's these 4, and you've heard about them, even if not in the Bible, in sci-fi, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Those sci-fi lovers get all kinds of references to that in movies. It's so dramatic, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, especially when one of them is death, followed by Hades. Oh my gosh! Dark and twisted minds will have fun with it. Yeah. But anyways, that's kind of a throwback to what Zechariah saw here in chapter 6. But there's a reference, and the real reason I want you here is chapter 4. There's a reference to a stone with eyeballs in chapter 3. A stone with 7 eyeballs in chapter 3, verse 9. But that's all it says. There's a stone with 7 eyeballs. And you're like, what's with the 7 eyeballs? That's gross. But then you get an idea over in chapter 4, verse 10 of what that might mean. So again, chapter 3, verse 9, there's a stone set in front of the high priest Joshua with 7 eyes on it. But not until chapter 4, verse 10 do you see what it might mean. And here's what chapter 4, verse 10 says. Who dares despise the day of small things? Since the 7 eyes of Yahweh that range throughout the earth will rejoice when they see the chosen capstone in the hand of Zerubbabel. What? Now, by the way, that would speak of the rebuilding and the accomplishing of the temple, when the exiles get to go back home to Israel. But in terms of what is the deal with the 7 eyes of Yahweh ranging throughout the earth, and they're going to be happy and rejoice when this deed is accomplished? Is it possible that the 7 eyes of Yahweh are actually 7 messengers of Yahweh sent into the world to be a presence in the world on Yahweh's behalf? That's all I'm saying. There's maybe more going on here than, oh yeah, God knows everything. Of course he does. But he also has beings in the mix working that knowledge out with him and his awareness in the world. You also want to know what's an interesting connection to this. Do you remember in the story of Genesis, Abraham hasn't had a kid yet. He had Ishmael through Hagar, and that wasn't right. So he's still waiting for his child with his wife Sarai, and God shows up, the angel of Yahweh, the physical manifestation of God, shows up with 2 angels. You remember the story? There's 3 visitors. And Abraham doesn't know that, so he's like, hey, come here, let me take care of you. He's being very hospitable, which righteous people always were doing. And while they're having this meal, Yahweh says to Abraham, by this time next year, you'll have your son. Sarah's over making some food for them, and she's chuckling to herself like, yeah, sure, we will. Why is she laughing? I wasn't laughing. Yes, you were. It was very funny. But anyways, as they're getting ready to leave, Yahweh with his 2 companions says, should I tell Abraham what we're doing? And he decides to stay and talk to Abraham about his plans. But he sends the 2 angels forward, and he tells Abraham, we're here to see. Think about that. We're here to see if the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah are as bad as we've heard. Are you like me? You're like, why does God have to do any reconnaissance at all? Doesn't he know if they're that bad? What's up with that? So, I'm not trying to call into question God's all-knowingness. What I'm trying to say is the way he has portrayed it himself. He has beings in his command that do this kind of thing for him. And I don't totally get how that all makes sense, but just keep that in mind. So these beings covered in eyeballs might be representative of that. His created beings are a part of his knowledge and awareness of things all over the earth. But also, check these out. These are awesome. And these are things that might just help you and encourage you in your life, so I wanted to share them with you. Psalm 33, 18 and 19. You should really dig into these another time. I'll get a different color out here. Psalm 33, 18 and 19. In fact, if you have your Bible, go ahead and turn there. It's worth looking at together. I'm going to go to church tonight. Look at this. Hopefully, not every moment of your life you'll need this word of encouragement, but you should have it in mind every moment of your life for the times when it creeps up on you and you do need it. But the eyes of Yahweh are on those who fear him, on those whose hope is in his unfailing love, to deliver them from death and keep them alive in famine. The eyes of Yahweh are on those who fear him, and whose hope is in his unfailing love. Now, what does it mean if his eyes are on you? His eyes on the sparrow. What does that mean if it's on you?
He's watching.
So there's more than just knowledge and awareness. To have his eye on you speaks of he's on your side. Because in Psalm chapter 1, for instance, I'm going to give you an idea of why that language is significant beyond just knowledge. For Yahweh watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. Why does he separate out that Yahweh watches over the way of the righteous, but as if it's not so true for the wicked? It's not because God's unaware of the wicked. There's a difference between his eye being on you and watching over you versus just knowing that it's going on. You see that? So if his eye is on those who fear him, on those whose hope is in his unfailing love, that means that he's watching out for you, not just that he sees you. How about Psalm 34, verses 15 and 16? Oh man, this is sweet. Psalm, what did I say? 34, 15, 16. So just one psalm over. Unless you turn to chapter 1 like I did. Okay. Will somebody read those two verses?
The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to blot out their name from the earth.
So you see, the eye being on you is not about knowledge, but favor. That's why the idea of his face is not on them, but against them. In the prayer, or the blessing that God told that God told Aaron to speak over Israel, remember a part of that blessing is, may Yahweh's face shine upon you. His face turned toward you. Because that means there's this relational blessed favor. If his face turns away from you or against you, ooh. I mean, have you ever heard the phrase "turn a cold shoulder"? Mm-hmm. Like turn away. Ooh, you do not want God doing that to you. So the eye being on you speaks of the watchful gaze of God over His beloved. How about Proverbs 15:3? I'm going to tie this all back to Revelation. Don't you worry, but I want to make sure we have these well in hand here. Now this might make you think of creatures with eyeballs all over themselves. I don't know. Anybody want to read that for us? Proverbs 15, verse 3.
The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good.
Now there it speaks of knowledge. Because his favor is not on the wicked and the good, right? So here it's just, now what if, just like the eyeballs, the 7 eyeballs on that stone, when I read this, in my culture, in my upbringing, I think the eyeballs in Yahweh's head right, are seeing everything on earth. Which, he probably doesn't have eyeballs, but his awareness, I have no doubt that's true. But could that also be symbolic and representative of his beings in his command? Roaming throughout the earth, understanding what's going on, reporting back, things like that. Interesting. And then Proverbs 22:12. This one may not sound as poetic and beautiful, but oh my, this is a very important statement about Yahweh. Somebody read that for us.
The eyes of the Lord keep guard over knowledge, and him who has it, but he overthrows the words of the treacherous.
So if Yahweh's eyes are keeping watch over knowledge, what is true? We talked about the faithful and true witness, Jesus. But your word was overthrow, in the NIV it's frustrate. But the idea that those who try to twist the truth, manipulate, distort, like Satan is the master of, and as all who follow his way, they become very good at this. Those who twist the truth and try to manipulate others with falsehood, this is a promise, and this is one to hold on to in prayer when situations arise that are unfair. God has declared, Solomon knew this of Yahweh, that he frustrates the words of the unfaithful. He overthrows their attempts to distort the truth. Let's bring all of these truths back to Revelation. Why would suffering and persecuted Christians under the strong hand of the emperor in Rome, who seems to be beyond anyone stopping him? I mean, he's the most powerful man on earth. And who can withstand the power of Caesar? Why would this vision of these beings with eyeballs all around, keeping in mind the language of these verses, why might that be comforting to faithful disciples of Jesus who feel like there's no way they can overcome their enemy? He's too powerful, and we're under his boot. Why might the eyeballs be helpful?
Because God sees what's happening to them, and they will be rewarded. He will take care of them. In the end, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, that's it. In the end, they will be rewarded.
Does this not go directly back to Jesus' message to each one of the 7 churches?
Yeah.
I know. I know your deeds. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. I know. And the reason that the persecuted disciple needs to hear that is because when you are suffering terribly for doing what's right, you end up in the place of Psalm 22, where David says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? I cry out to you and you ignore me. And anytime you get to the place where you actually start believing that God does not even see what's happening to you, he isn't moved in concern for you, he's just this distant being doing his own thing while I go through this thing by myself. Your mind can easily go there. Is that not true?
Yeah.
Especially when no one's on your side, no one's rooting for you. And these huddled little groups of Christians in some of these really hard persecution situations, they need to know, and if the eyeballs help them, great, that the eyes of God are on the wicked and the good. The eyes of God are on his righteous ones, on the ones who fear him. They need to know that God's not failing to intervene because he's unaware. He's deciding not to intervene right now because there's greater glory for you. Just wait. In fact, when we get to chapter 6, we're going to see, go there with me, we're going to, spoilers. I'm probably going to reference this passage quite a bit in our look because it's so precious and so apropos to most things we're doing. But in the 5th seal out of the 7, and this is in chapter 6, verse 9, in this verse you hear the frustration of Christ's persecuted ones on earth and apparently also in heaven. Verse 9, when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice. Now, listen to the frustration in their voice. Listen to the yearning for justice to be done. How long sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood. If they're asking how long, what does that indicate?
They've been there already.
It's been a long time already. You don't say, are we there yet? If you feel like you haven't been in the car very long, when is dinner going to be ready? If you just, So this idea, you link that to Psalm 22. We need to know that the eyes of Yahweh represented in these creatures, He knows. Just like Jesus said to those 7 churches, I know. Don't think that my seeming lack of intervention is out of lack of caring or lack of awareness. This is all a part of what I'm doing, so hang in there and trust me. And so look at what God says to these longing souls. Verse 11, then each of them was given a white robe. Hey, that sounds familiar. And they were told to do what?
Wait a little longer.
No! Oh, every kid's worst nightmare. How long? Just wait. But just wait a little longer. Little longer. Until when? When is, according to this vision, when is God's marker for the timing? Until the full number of your fellow servants, your brothers and sisters, are killed just as you have been. So my suffering is, in God's eyes, linked to the suffering of all of His people. And this is where my egotism, my narcissism, has to die on the cross. Because I have to remember I'm a part of a gigantic family now. My suffering is not just mine. It's linked to Jesus' suffering and the suffering of all who belong to Him. So my woe and my suffering is legitimate, but it's not isolated. And God would even say that. Just wait. You're not the only ones. More are coming. I'll take care of this. I've got a bigger program here than just you. So just trust me. It's going to be all right. That's how I understand the eyeballs. Otherwise, it's just freaky. Why did God make a creature like that? I do think there has to be more to it than just God's creative, oddness in creating beings. I think it has to actually signify something for it to make it into the vision of what John sees in heaven. There's something about these beings that represent God Himself, which is His awareness of what we're going through. Now, any disagreements or any other ideas about the eyeballs? What do you think? Because I'm just putting together best thoughts just like you are. So, okay. I hope that encourages you, beyond the creepiness, that the eyeballs are God's eye being on you, His faithful ones. And you can endure knowing that. Okay. What's the time? I don't know. Okay, that's some time. Let's do it. I want to move into this chant just a bit. Have we seen the language of who was and is to come already in the Revelation?
Yes.
Where was it?
1
Verse
8.
8.
1:8.
Now, if you look at chapter 1, verse 8, notice it's not exactly the same in its wording.
Right.
In chapter 1, verse 8, it's who is, who was, and who is to come. And in chapter 4, it's who was, and is to come. I don't want to pretend that every little thing has a whole bunch of meaning, but it makes me wonder. In your mind, what's the most natural way to say it?
Who was and is to come.
Yeah, my brain's like, let's go chronological, okay? So let's start in the past, go to the present, and the future. So it does make me think, what's going on in chapter 1, where he's like, let's start with the is, talk about the was, and then the is to come. Now again, this is just a thought of mine. I'm not going to tell you this is a doctrine or anything. When John wrote it in chapter 1, he was writing in the present. Correct? He's introducing it to real churches at a real time in the present.
Yes.
He begins with the is. The was and is to come follows. In chapter 4, as I understand this, he has a vision of something that speaks of the past. The was. Because think about what the worship is that follows this. So, in order to see, I think, verse 8 clearly, we need to keep going. Look at verse 9 with me. Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worships him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns, their victory crowns, before the throne and say, now look carefully with me at their worshipful declaration. What are they focused on in worshiping God? You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. Why?
For all things created.
You created all things.
By your will, they were created and have their being. Of all the things in all the storyline of God that make him worthy of worship, creation is one good one, but it's not the only one. And as we get into chapter 5, you'll see they come up with other things to be worshipful about. And I find it very important to consider that the creatures around God's throne represent earthly life that God created. And then the 24 elders seem human, right? Earthly creation. But we're in heaven, for goodness sake. What's going on there? And what I'm wondering is the beginning of John's vision not so much a vision of the is, or the is to come, but of the was? Is he getting a sense of the creation of all things, where God with his heavenly counsel brings all things into being, and here they are worshiping him for it? Because if they were going to worship God at the moment of John, the moment in the chronology when John's taken up to heaven, why focus on creation? Why not focus on redemption? Why not focus on the new creation coming if it's a future thing? Why do they go to the creation? And listen to, I love the way they say this. I hope you incorporate a lot of this stuff into your prayer life and your worship life. For you created all things. That pretty much says it all right there. But notice the way they go back and they restate it in a pretty awesome way. By your will, they were created and have their being. Man, that's rich. That's loaded. By your will. Now think about this. I did this exercise with a bunch of young people at it's like a summer missions project in LA area at a homeless shelter. There's a bunch of kids there. We were trying to teach them about God and all this, and we're teaching them about creation. And it was kind of silly, but I was hoping it would make a point. I'm like, anybody feel like some pizza right now? That is a no-brainer. So I was like, yeah, totally want pizza. I'm like, who's gonna make some? What? Like right now, who can make some pizza right now? Huh? I was totally, what are you talking about? I bet I totally disappointed them. They thought I was gonna bring pizza. But I was trying to say, anybody here, if you just think hard enough and picture it hard enough, make us some pizzas? No. Exactly. By your will, they're created? That is, human beings can't deal with that. Because will is one thing, but you also need resources, you need talent and ability and all that, right? I cannot will things into being, and there are some who teach you can. Yeah, I can. That's a God thing. And this is why I use the name partly because this keeps in my mind, when we say Lord, that speaks of a certain thing. That speaks of authority, correct?
Yes.
That's great. He has all authority. But the name of God speaks of being. I read an interesting note from a scholar who said that when God first answered Moses in chapter 3 of Exodus, who should I say is sending me? He said, tell them I am. Because he said, I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. And he says, tell them I am sending you. And then he switches gears and says, tell them that Yahweh is sending me. That's the name that you'll use for me throughout all generations. And here's what the scholar said. The I am is God speaking of himself. Yahweh is a third person reference to the same thing, the he is, the one who is. And so when he speaks of himself, he could say the I am, but when we speak of him, we would say Yahweh because he is, Now, the beingness of God, his beingness is such, which is unique to him, only he can do this. His beingness is such that his will can bring about other beingness. Humans can't even procreate that way. Isn't that right? Like, there's a little more to it than that. Some people have no will to have children, and there they have them. Other people have all the will in the world, and they aren't able to. Most people, it's a mix of somewhere in the middle. God alone is the will to bring about all things into being, and they have their being in you. And think about that. The beingness is very important because, let's pretend this is a human or an animal or anything else. If you look at the cover and the outside, it sure looks like a book to you, maybe even a Bible to you, because Bibles have certain looks sometimes. Have you ever gone to the office store and they have a book on the shelf that when you open it, there's a big empty spot because you're supposed to put your keys or your special document, and then it hides as a book, and no one's going to think to look in there for anything special. So you can tell that the appearance of something, the shell of something, isn't the beingness of something. What if God just created, and you maybe have seen the Twilight of an episode like this, where the I don't remember even what happened, but there's these travelers that come off, and there's this town, and everyone's standing still. Everything looks so real, but everyone's just still. And it's almost like a wax museum situation, where it's a real life situation, there's a party in this one, and there's a thing on this one, but nobody's moving. And what their worship makes me think is that God didn't just bring stuff into existence, he gave them being. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Think about these creatures around his throne. Not just things from John to look at as, oh, that's an interesting piece of art. No, they're like alive and they're doing things. And I want to tell you, as brilliant as human beings are, AI, artificial intelligence, is one of the great mysteries of our current generation. Because we're making strides, but we just cannot bring something into beingness. We can just code stuff. And if human technology does anything, it shouldn't be puffing humans up. It should be making us look at God and go, how did you do this? How did you create a Cindy? I don't get it. It's a bunch of code, chromosomes, and DNA, and yet she's got beingness. I don't know. And he's done that billions of times. And that's just human. My dog has an actual personality and brain, and he's got beingness. And I just hope that worship that you hear them, I hope that's all a part of how you hear that how do you not fall down and say, worthy are you, God? Your beingness is that awesome, that all the beingness is from your beingness. Oh, that's too good. Okay. Now, why did I bring that up in reference to the Holy, Holy, Holy? If creation is their focus in this worship time, I can't help but think, because aren't they responding to the worship of the creatures, the living creatures? The 24, whenever they hear the living creatures do their thing, the 24 start doing their thing. It's a responsive worship time. So, if the responsiveness to the Holy, Holy, Holy is the Lord God Almighty who was and is to come, is, oh God, you're so worthy because you have created. I'm starting to wonder if they are representing the first part of the worship, which is who was, who brought all things into being. So when I say that Revelation actually covers creation to new creation, that's what I'm talking about. Here in chapter 4, we start at creation. The vision is not just of heaven, it's of the response of heaven to God's creative work, his creative power, and his creative wisdom. Did you notice the way that John referred to God twice in verses 9 and 10? The same way, with the same formula. He refers to him in two ways. Number one, the one who sits on the throne. And what's the other one? Now, don't yank this out of its historical context, or I think we might miss something. Are there others who sit on thrones? Yeah, I mean, in the scene there's 24 other thrones. But earthly speaking, the early Christians in persecution, in their minds, who's on the throne earthly-wise? Who is the emperor? Yep. So if we just leave it, the one who's on the throne, of course we're in heaven, we know which throne we're talking about. But the second part of it is a huge distinguishing mark between the earthly throne of Caesar and the heavenly throne of God. Because yes, he sits on the throne, but what else is true?
He lives forever and ever.
Oh man, these Christians needed to hear that. Because that monster on the throne of Rome is making our lives a living hell because we love a greater emperor and a greater king. But ours lives forever and ever. And this one on the throne of Rome, who knows, he's going out soon. And by the way, as you watch I don't know if you've ever looked at it very closely, the emperor lineup throughout the Roman history, there are certain periods where there's an emperor for a couple months, and then they die or assassinated. There's another emperor for maybe a year, dies or assassinated. And the turnover on the emperor's throne of Rome at certain periods was ridiculous. There were times when they thought they had two emperors until one kills the other one. I mean, the one who sits on the throne means something, but after a while it's like, but what does it mean? What's going on here? So think about this. Now we're so used to it, it's like, well, duh, but think about it. What if the one on the throne of heaven could die or be replaced by someone else who ended up being stronger? What if you had to find democratically had to choose someone else to sit on the throne next time? Can you imagine? We can't even get for a 4-year term in the White House. It's like the cycle, the turnover there is just a nightmare every time we start going through this again because most of us have no idea who to pick and why. Can you imagine the throne of the universe? Not just one country, but entire planets, an entire cosmos. And oh God, thank you that the one who sits on the throne is the same one who lives forever and ever. Are you living on that? Oh my goodness. These details matter to the early church. The language is necessary. John is not random. He's not loose with his language. Everything speaks to what is needed by the churches. We need to know that there is one on the throne who also lives forever and ever. And the beings of heaven recognize him. He doesn't just have power to get things done now. He's the very one that had the power to bring everything into existence in the first place. Oh my goodness. Chapter 4, I could stay in chapter 4, I don't know how long, just thinking and talking and meditating on these truths. Now we're almost done, because time's almost out. But what do you make of this? Now it's your turn to talk. What do you make of it that the 24 elders, in response to the Holy, Holy, Holy chant of the 4 creatures, their posture is to fall down before the one on the throne, and then to throw their crowns of victory, to lay them down before the throne? What do you make of that physical gesture? Those two physical gestures of the 24 elders.
It's like, I surrender.
Yeah. To fall down before the royalty, isn't that it?
Mm-hmm.
You win. I submit. But we're actually going to see this later in the vision as other prophets in the Old Testament had this experience. On multiple occasions, John falls down in front of somebody. We saw it in chapter 1, right? Before the Jesus figure. But later in the vision, twice, he falls down in front of an angel figure. Not Jesus, not a divine figure, but an angel, to worship the angel. John! Oh, like one time I get it. He's amazing. He did it a second time. Why? Why would he fall down in the presence of an angel? It's because he was overwhelmed by, I don't know what it was about the angel. Was it his presence? Was it his knowledge? I don't know. But twice, the apostle of Jesus falls down to worship an angel. Which, by the way, in the early church, that was being taught, that you should worship angels. And he knew better.
It was being taught you should? Did you say it was being taught you
Not
should?
him, but that was a teaching coming into the churches, yeah. In fact, in Jude, Paul warns against that. There are different places in the New Testament they're like, don't fall
Oh, I
for
thought
the
you
worship
said
of
that they
angels.
should
No.
worship it. Oh, I'm
They
sorry.
were being taught that, which was false. So the angel says to John, don't do that. I am a fellow servant with you and all the other ones who are faithful to Jesus. So the falling down indicates not only a willful choice that I surrender to you, but it also speaks of being overwhelmed. Just almost involuntary. Like, oh my goodness, And no doubt, you'd think they'd always be that way, don't you? Like they're in God's presence with lightning and thunderings and rumblings and peals. But it's in that moment when they hear the chant of the cherubim, or the seraphim, or the conglomerate, whatever, the four living beings. When they hear that, they respond, they're like, yes! They fall down. And they have to declare his worthiness because of creation. So as wonderful and as glorious as these creatures are in God's presence, they recognize something. We would not exist if you hadn't willed it. Man. And I don't know, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if I've actually come to the place in worship where I can get that, I don't know the right word, raw, where I can actually say, I've understood, Lord, I don't exist without you. I've said those words, but I don't know if I've actually reached the place of actual understanding. You are necessary to my very existence. And that's not poetic. You know what I mean? Like we say that to romantic love interests. I would die without you. Or we say that to our children or something like, what would I be without you? That's literally true. In Hebrews 1 it says that Jesus sustains all things by his powerful word. So he didn't just have the power to create it and bring it into being. If he chose not to keep it going, it just and then all of us. Oh, I don't know that I've ever experienced worship the way I'm supposed to, because I don't know that I fully understand who I'm worshiping. Okay, I know I don't fully understand him, and if I did, wouldn't I involuntarily just fall down? And if I had anything of any value of my own, wouldn't I be like, here?
Yeah.
Now, there could be significance to the fact that my victory is his victory. I have no doubt that that's a part of the crown thing. But I'm also thinking, anything of value on my person? Like if it was a crown, or if it was an earring, or if it was, here, oh, take it, oh my goodness. You're worthy of everything, because you brought all things into being. So this chapter 4 scene, I kind of just want it to be, for all of us, our marker point of worship. When we gather on Sundays, when you're in your bedroom alone, when you're driving in your car listening to music, I would love us to be rooted here. Let me just start, Father, by saying, wow, you made all this by your will. They exist and have their being. Oh God, let's start here. And then, as Revelation does, you'll make your way through the story like we talked about on Sunday, and you will never run out of reasons. Like park yourself on creation and then just inch your way forward. God, you totally got them out of Egypt. You totally rocked that thing. 10 plagues, every one of them more effective, okay, than the last. Like I can say they're great, but wow, you opened that Red Sea. And sometimes you and I read the Old Testament when they recount the history. We're like, oh, I know the story, and you flip through that psalm because the whole psalm is rehashing the whole story. I'm that way too. But let me just invite you. The reason it's in a psalm, which is in a song of worship, is that the psalmist is saying, hold on. Look what he did. Think about it. Who else could have done that? And even though it kind of goes from one event to the next, I think the psalmist would invite you to say, did you think about that one yet? Have you ever considered the fact that God brought water out of a rock? What? What are you talking about? How does that even make sense? How did Jesus take a few things and just fill up 12 big baskets, and they fed 5,000 plus people? They brought the baskets back, they're still full. Oh my gosh. How did they not fall down and throw their whatever at Jesus? Like, what? You know? In other words, what does it take to get you to worship, you know? Well, what does it take? For my personal answer, it's way too much. For some reason, my bar is way too high to move me to worship. When I've got an entire book full of them, where I should be able to start a creation and just make my way forward in worship. So, all right, enough of that. Got a little preachy there. But that to me, that's Revelation 4. With all the weird creatures thrown in. This is where. Now, as we move into chapter 5, and I invite you to kind of prepare before next time if you have the mind and time to do so. In chapter 5, after looking at creation, in chapter 4, you're going to see why John has to be here. What is it that occurs that he's supposed to witness for the sake of everyone who will listen to him? Now, since we have the few moments to do so, let's peek. Chapter 5, verse 1. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. We're going to come back and look at these with more detail because a lot of this is prophetic language. But just to get the big picture. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice. To whom is he proclaiming it, do you think? I mean, so far we've seen God, 24 elders, 4 creatures, and now this mighty angel proclaiming. Who is he proclaiming to?
Anyone here.
Whoever's there, right?
Now, by the way, is it possible there's other creatures, other beings there that he hasn't described yet? Sure. But the angel proclaims in a loud voice, who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll? But no one in heaven or earth or under the earth, which is a very common formula for the New Testament. Heaven, earth, under the earth. By the way, what does under the earth represent? Sheol. Death, right? Sheol, the place where the dead are. So that's basically your formula for all the cosmos. Everything in creation. No one in heaven or earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside. What is this scroll? I wept and I wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. This is almost like the sword and the stone thing. Who's worthy? Come on, who wants to try it? No one's even going to try it. They know they're not worthy. So he's weeping. And I always wondered at that. Why is he weeping? Like, how? He's invested, man. Whoa, he's really into this. Well, again, he's a prophet and he knows he's here for a reason. Think about that. This is the decision of God. That's what the scroll has to be, based on the other prophetic visions we've looked at. This is the decision of God and his council. It's right here. I'm this close to knowing what the decision is. And you're telling me no one can tell me what it says? That would be the most horrific anticlimactic thing ever.
Not to make you cry.
Yeah. I wept and I wept. Why did you bring me here if no one can even tell me the real answer? Like poor Emma, she had to look at these gift bags all day yesterday because we made her wait till the end of the day. And what if at the end we're like, sorry, no one can open these bags. You can't even look inside. Come on! I think she may have wept and wept too. But look at verse 5. Then one of the elders, so one of the 24, said to me, do not weep. See? And I wonder if he pointed. I wonder if he's like, see. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. Now, who are we talking about?
Christ.
Has to be. Has to be. Because he is from the tribe of Judah. Lion speaks to strength, to devour, to conquer, and all that. So he is the conqueror of Judah, within Judah. The root of David, we've already seen this language used of Messiah. And remember, he's the root and the offspring of David. The beginning and the end. Oh my gosh. But notice what it says about him. He has triumphed. Now that seems new to the heavenly scene, wouldn't you say? Because where is he? He's not at the right hand right now. He's not there in the picture yet. So in the vision as we are seeing it unfold, the triumph of the Lion of Judah, the root of David, seems to be new. Which is why I think we're in the was. We've gone from the creation in chapter 4, and where are we now in chapter 5? We've zoomed through a whole lot of the story to get to what?
The is.
Well, isn't it the resurrected Lord ascended to heaven? He's triumphed, which means he's already gone through his earthly ministry. He's already been defeated at the cross, which was actually a victory. He's already been raised from the dead, victory. And he's already been brought here to heaven itself, his ascension, his victory. So the victory of Christ would speak of his return to heaven and his glory.
Right.
We've gone from creation in chapter 4, zoom through the story to get here in chapter 5, Jesus is back. He's arrived. And now that this decision has been reached by the heavenly council, Jesus is the only one authorized. Worthy means fit, correct?
Yes.
The only one who's fit to do it. And what do we know that Jesus said of his own self that makes that perfectly reasonable? All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So who else could open this? God's decided something tremendous. We don't know what it is yet. We're like all the early Christians going, what is it? What is it? But what we do know is there's no one who's able to reveal it except Jesus. The revelation is about to really kick off. Because what we're revealing now in the revelation is God's decision. What has he decided? So peek into it a little bit. Chapter 5 into chapter 6. What is God's decision about this whole thing? Oh man. One of the decisions he made is that Jesus, his son, is the only one worthy to make it known and to make it so. He's the only one worthy. So we're going to get into the more detailed language of these first few verses because there's a lot of Old Testament prophecy in there. I want to make sure we don't miss it.